Okay. They can hear you if you talk.
Oops. Hey, everybody. Give me 1 second.
What's going on between my ears? Everyone seems to be so clear, but I'm feeling foggy. I barely can breathe. Let's talk about it with Ronnie and Steve. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. Mental Health Awareness.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Judgement Seesaw. Once again, I'm your host, Ronnie Evans. I'm here with another special guest. I've got Steve Paulo today from Underdog Fantasy and a variety of other sites as well. Before we dive into you, Steve, first of all, if this is your first time watching, the Judgement Seesaw is a concept that comes from economics. It's been parlayed into therapy, and it helps you identify how much you're actually listening and sympathizing with someone else or another like event or anything happening in your life. And the core of it is this: if you are judging something, you literally can't be understanding at the same time, and vice versa. So you can try out that exercise on your own in your free time, test it, and try to beat it. I did after my therapist taught me it, and I couldn't. So it's a really useful tool to actively listen, understand, put yourself in other people's shoes, and try to be a more understanding and less judgmental person. And speaking of understanding people and just getting to know people in general, I want to get to know you, Steve. Before we dive into all of the mental health stuff, let's take like a minute real quick and just tell us everything you've got going on in fantasy. Plug it away, because this is a fantasy football and mental health, fantasy sports and mental health podcast.
Well, thanks for the intro, Ronnie. That's fantastic. I love the concept and love the jam that we all just sat through. That was fantastic and just had me bopping here in my seat. So yeah, I'm Steve Paulo. I am by day, I am the engineering manager for the fantasy games team at Underdog Fantasy. We work on the draft games and the pick'em games and all the games that you love to play on the fantasy side over at Underdog, and super proud of my team and what we work on all the time and what we put out. So that's fantastic. It is a high stress job. It's a lot of work. There's a lot writing on what we do. And so, that is part of sort of what I do in my side time, what I have between kids and family and work and everything else. I create football projections at Craig.football is the website. And it's we can get into it later, but that's a backronym for calculations resulting in the analysis of individuals on the gridiron, but it is named after 49er great Roger Craig. So there's that. And in the past, I've recently stepped away from some of my other fantasy sports content, but I was writing for Razzball for both baseball and football for several years, running the Raz Slam and the Raz Bowl over there for a while. And I'm still going to last 2 seasons and the coming season, I'll be part of the Fantasy Pros expert consensus ranking with my Craig projections, doing the rankings for that every week. So that's kind of where I'm at with fantasy. So
that's awesome. It's a lot. Just we got Craig, we got Razzball, we got Fantasy Pros, we got Underdog, we got you doing a bunch of different things, hosting tournaments back in the day. Like, you seem to be very, very involved in a really particular niche of the industry, which is like offering the platform for people to engage in different ways to embrace fantasy sports. It seems like you have your fingers in a lot of that and have for a while, and I think that's really, really cool. I'm excited to get into this with you because you'll have a pretty unique perspective on things as well.
I always try to.
Well, speaking of mental health, since that is the main focus of the show, before we dive into the actual interview portion of this, would you mind giving just like a 1-minute run through on your relationship with it, what you've seen, what you've experienced, and that?
Yeah, no problem at all. Like, so yeah, I mean, in my personal life, I've definitely dealt with anxiety and stress and different things, not to an extent that a lot of people I know have. I've been lucky to both have a great support structure, both as a child growing up, my family very supportive, my parents very involved, very supportive, and not everybody has that. And that's obviously a huge base to build off of. Then I went and fell in love with a psychologist. She was a psychology grad student at the time, but my wife is a psychologist. And so there's certainly a lot of conversation that occurs regarding mental health and coping mechanisms and empathy and judgment, like you're talking about, and judgment versus understanding and that kind of thing. So, at this point, I think the biggest concern I have when it comes to like mental health is that I'm raising two kids with my wife, and the two of us are very obviously very, not concerned, but obviously very interested in making sure that they grow up understanding their emotions and understanding what, that life will throw things at you that, sometimes look like you can't take them on, and just blithely saying, oh, you can take on anything is not helpful. Learning how to actually, there is a concept of toxic positivity, and we try not to practice that because it can really lead you down a bad path. And so, I like I said, I've been pretty blessed, pretty lucky to deal with only the most minor kind of versions of anxiety and stress related mental health issues in my life. But it has been because of a great support system and because of very active, intentional sort of living and understanding. So.
Well, I love that, especially that final phrase, like active and intentional living, whether it is mental health or other things that you are trying to keep an eye on. That's a great way to phrase it. And just trying to be intentional and constantly like engaging in the pursuit of something is great.
Right.
For you, what I just heard is probably my favorite type of person to talk about mental health with. It's actually not that I don't enjoy hearing stories from other people like myself who have like these life crippling and life altering things that they have been through and so on.
Sure.
But the mental health field has had a bit of a, I don't know if I'm ready to call it an explosion, but it has become more and more welcomed every year by people that don't experience chronic issues.
Mhm.
And when I discuss it with people, getting the insight from someone like yourself that maybe isn't dealing with some crazy, huge, traumatic thing that's altering, so on and so forth, it is a really important, valuable perspective. And then you got the juice of your wife in the background, like along the way. So it's fantastic to have you on, man. Thank you for coming on. I want to also know that Steve, I had another guest who had a awful thing happen in their family, and I'm not going to mention my name, but they had to back out last minute. Steve filled in. So this is all very much a 24-hour come up and organization type podcast. And so thank you again for hopping in to do this.
Not a problem. It's a fantastic concept, just of the podcast in general, or the show in general, and specifically the sort of 30 for 30 you're doing with mental health awareness month. It's fantastic. So I love being involved and I love helping out.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's dive into it a little bit.
Cool.
You're pretty plugged into the community, and the fantasy sports community can be both supportive and it also can be toxic. Have you navigated? How have you navigated this sort of duality, and what strategies have you found effective in fostering a positive and healthy outlook on things and experience?
It's a great question. And you're absolutely right. Like there are, not only are there elements of the community that can be supportive and elements of the community that can be toxic, there are plenty of elements of the community that will flip between the two, and sometimes will be supportive and sometimes will be toxic. And so it's not just about who you interact with, because sometimes you will get people who, I've dealt with this person before. They've been so reasonable. They've been so welcoming. And then something happens and they flip, or just your the way you interpret what they're saying changes, something changes. Right. And so for me, the big kind of key, and this is like a through line through everything, because to me, it's kind of really a core element of like having an empathetic outlook on things, is that, you have to decide for yourself what is important. And too often people, I think, find really, really significant importance in the viewpoints of other people. And we do all this, right? Everything from like, keeping up with the Joneses and trying to do things that whether it's in our professional lives or, in our personal lives or with our neighbors, or whatever, that just, we're worried about what other people think. Now, obviously, if you're creating content in the fantasy sports world, of course, you're kind of worried about what other people think. You want people to read your stuff, listen to your podcast, go use your projections, use your tools, watch your shows, whatever. So you are trying to attract that kind of, some attention, and you are interested in creating things people want to see. But it's really important to, I think, separate, the people who are supportive of your process from the people who are critical of your results. And I think that finding that balance both inside yourself and then in the community you surround yourself with is crazy important, because there is definitely sort of a line that gets crossed at some point as somebody goes and creates. And especially, I think this is really, really true of rankings, projections, anything that is really putting an opinion on a large swath of players, and you're making significant opinion decisions, right? The results are not always going to work out. The variability in sports obviously is always there. Yeah, I found it far worse in baseball than it is in football, but it's definitely present everywhere, from injuries to the way the coach thinks of somebody changing midseason and things altering, whatever. You've got to trust in and find support for your process and tweak and improve your process when you get constructive criticism on it. But if somebody's criticizing the results and just saying, well, you said Caleb Williams this year would be a top 10 quarterback and he ended up number 25, you must be an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right,
It's like,
right.
My process was good. Here's why I thought he would be top 10, and here's why he wasn't. And here are the things I could have seen, and here are the things that I couldn't have seen. And then I'll look at it and go, are there things I could have looked at from his college tape or from, preseason or whatever that would have led me to understand what ended up happening? Sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. The fact is, though, that should come from yourself. You should be looking at improving your process to get better results. Criticism of the results is useless. It is only going to make you feel bad. It is not something you can really work with. And so anybody or any element or corner of the community that is coming at you with significant criticism of your results alone, that's what you just need to sort of ignore, cut out, block, mute, whatever you need to do on whatever platform you need to do it. But don't let that be the voice you hear. You make it your voice and the supportive voices of your process.
Steve, I love that. I mean, it's essentially a more surgical way to address boundary setting specific to the fantasy industry. And it, especially whether it's this industry or not, if somebody's watching that doesn't work in fantasy sports, if you do anything online, there is an element of toxicity and people that will come at you for anything you say that's incorrect. You talked about how it's not like you can have the best process in the world and you're still going to get things wrong. Yeah. For people who are engaging in fantasy sports but are not creating fantasy content, one thing that you should definitely take to heart and understand and empathize with these content creators, as Steve just alluded to. I don't know the exact figure, but by my read, it's about a 30 to 40% failure rate. Even the best people, if you look at overall season projections, there's just no way to accurately quantify and predict everything perfectly. So when people get into the 70 to 80% hit rate, they are that's a nuclear month for them.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I love everything you just brought up there, man. Giving people perspective, not only as writers, but also as players, to hear that is really, really valuable. Is there any other, before we dive into the next thing, are there other elements of the things to look out for that maybe would come even more so within the industry itself and not from outside viewers?
Right. Yeah. No, I just think that in general, for more within the industry, if you're looking to get your start, for instance, when I first started, I lucked out in that the first place that I wrote, not counting my own blogs nobody read, but really started creating content, was at Razzball, because Gray and Rudy and the guys that run that place, they're fantastic and they're reasonable and they're good people. And so, it was easy to work there and to have reasonable expectations put on me for, the timing things. I think there are lots of outlets out there, and I'm not going to go into details about who or what kind of outlets, but there are plenty out there that don't make reasonable requests and requirements of their content creators. And so I think that really, like so many things in life, like you said, boundaries, right? Recognizing that, especially because almost everybody starting out, maybe literally everyone starting out, you're doing it for free. Nobody is paying you to write about the next thing right off the bat. You kind of have to build up a little bit, of a body of work to get to that point. So, you might want something out of that. You're getting something out of that relationship,
right.
But treating it transactionally, although I don't love treating human interaction that way, actually kind of makes a lot of sense in this time, because really you need to be giving up a reasonable amount of your time and effort for something reasonable back if you're working with the platform that you're trying to get your voice out on. And so I think just keeping an eye out for that and really listening to yourself when it comes to that is crazy important.
Man, my old econ professor would argue that everything's transactional.
That's the poli-sci major in me.
Yeah, so, right. Well, so you're deeply involved in fantasy sports and so on and so forth. And we talked a little bit about just the toxicity that come from outside. If you put out rankings, you put out content, it's not always going to be correct. is the strategy of just ignoring that the only way you handle it, or do you have any other strategies that you found effective in fostering like a positive and some more supporting online experience and environment for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, ignoring is a big part. I gotta be honest. Like, really, when you get some of those bad voices, just blocking them and moving on, like that. That's a huge just help for your mental health. I would say though that you need to separate out the folks who are actually trying to do you harm, troll you, make you feel bad, versus people that are legitimately saying, like, you know what, this doesn't pass the sniff test. What you've put out here doesn't make sense. You've got Aaron Rodgers as the number one QB next year, and I just don't see how that could be possible, right? I mean, that kind of thing. There are times when you need to reflect on even harsh criticism and see if it is something. Again, separating your results from your process. And if criticism of results can result in tweaking your process, that's a good thing. And you can take in and thrive on that kind of feedback if you are careful about it. But it is hard sometimes to tell. So I always feel like, block first, make friends later. Like, really, if you feel like somebody is being negative towards you, there's nothing wrong with just moving on past those folks. Like, nobody's going to come get you, come tell you that you were wrong for doing that. But if you do feel like, I'm getting some kind of harsh feedback on this thing, but I also kind of see the grain of truth in it, and it's not simply trolling or simply being aggressive, I think it's important then, again, don't worry about changing the results of whatever you put out, but what was your process and how could that have changed?
Right.
In retrospect, how could you have done that differently, given that it came out maybe with a result that was somehow way off base, as it turns out?
Yeah. Well, and just like you could take the idea of focusing on the process rather than the result and very easily parlay it back to psychology and therapy and self-help.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of looking at the end result of your day, look at the steps that you took and the things you did throughout the day that affected that, and the habits that you are either subconsciously, even sometimes, exercising. For me, that I'm projecting a little bit, but that's been very, very important for me in therapy over the years as I've navigated some ego issues and so on and so forth. And just like taking that retrospective look at the ingredients that make up the outcome is really important in real life and also for fantasy football content creation. So I'm with you with all of that. I had one other question on that front. Oh, the toxicity online. I personally try not to engage too much, even if I disagree with someone, and I just like when people are toxic to you online, your recommendation is typically to ignore it and block it. But if we could dive just a little bit deeper into why and just look at what happens when you do engage. What I want to just paint a picture from what I have seen and then let you chime in and correct or add your own perspective. But I have been paying attention to the industry for about a decade now, online, the content creators, the interactions, and so on and so forth. And it seems like without fail, whenever somebody gets into a back and forth that's negative and it spirals upward, doesn't matter if the content creator was correct or not, it doesn't really look good for them in the long run. There's like no winning that scenario. And so that's been my feeling on it. And I'm not perfect. I have definitely engaged in a couple things over the years. But do you disagree with that? Do you have anything that you would add to it?
All I would say is like, it's not, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that it's going to be obvious to you right when it happens, but there are two major categorizations of feedback that you will get online from, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you're on. And one of them are well-meaning and one of them are ill-meaning, right? I mean, literally ill-intentioned and well-intentioned, right? So regardless of the tone or what was said, if you can decipher through it that it was a well-intentioned critique, even if it came off snarky or rude, then responding back with something that is very either asking for some details, like, hey, could you go into what you think I screwed up there or whatever, maybe that gets a decent response back, and that engagement can become a healthy and productive engagement. If you believe for whatever reason, for any reason at all, that this was sort of again, kind of an ill-intentioned or from bad faith sort of argument or comment, you got to just block and move on. Like there's like you said, there isn't winning it. It's playing chess with a pigeon, right? He's just gonna, knock all the pieces over and shit on the board and think he won. So there's just no point in doing it. And so, that might be hard. I think for a lot of people, there's a pride element to it. But there is no empathy with pride. So, you have to kind of pick one or the other. So, and I find that it's just a far better existence to be an empathetic person than a prideful one. So I try to just ignore that stuff and move on. But I can see engaging in harsh criticism if you do think the person was coming from actually wanting to give you a critique. Then maybe the engaging could be healthy.
Well, I want to focus on the like you described the response to that as one of wanting to learn and hear more.
Mm.
That is
Mhm.
absolutely the way to handle it. And nobody out there on the planet, if they have a genuine like critique of you and they say, "Hey, you stink at this. That was wrong," and you respond by saying,
Tell me
I don't
how
even
or help
I don't
me.
agree or disagree. I want to
Right.
learn more.
Yeah.
Why are you saying that? Help me get better." Everyone's gonna be chill with that. And
Yep.
it's a great diffusion strategy and de-escalation strategy
Yeah.
too. Um, that actually ties a little bit into like a little bit of like a daily routine for a lot of people is just sitting through and scrolling through social media, checking
Right.
in on how they're posted, seeing what everyone else is doing, interacting,
Mhm.
keeping like you got to play the algorithm game and stay top of mind, not just to your friends, but also to the technology
Sure.
that's out there now. I'm curious about you, man. Could you walk us through like a typical day in your life and how you incorporate these sort of mental health practices or micro strategies into your daily
Right.
routine?
Yeah, there's a few things like so my thing so Underdog, just so you know, we're a completely remote workforce. There is a home base in Brooklyn, New York, but very few of the company actually work there. Most of us are at home or
Yeah.
whatever. And so I'm on the West Coast, so I'm Pacific time zone, and the majority of my coworkers are Central and Eastern. So I get up in the morning by about 6:30. I'm involved. I'm engaged. I'm not taking meetings, but I am sort of like responding to messages again. I'm a manager. I have a team. They often have questions for me, or we have to work on decisions together. So I start that pretty early in the day. One of the reasons I do that is I'm a morning person. It just works for me and it
Mm,
works for my mental health. And my mind is sort of firing at that hour. And not everybody is like that. But also because it means that by about 3 o'clock my time, it pretty much lessens my workload is much lighter. Like there's a lot less I need to respond to immediately. And that gives me time to do my sort of side interests and do things like my projection system and try to put content out and do different things. It gives me a little time in the afternoon. One of the things that I do that I found super impactful is turning off notifications, even on like
mm,
Twitter and stuff like that, and deliberately going to look for engagement and notifications and things, honestly, either on a schedule or as time permits, but not allowing it to sort of dominate. I think at this point, the only thing I really get notifications from on my phone are text messages, because sometimes my wife or son might text me and I actually need to respond quickly. But even emails and stuff, I don't let them push through. It's more about when am I going to take time to do that? And I think
yes.
just taking control of that stuff is hugely impactful, just to the overall day, because it gives me time. And then in the evening, I can do my scrolling through Instagram reels or whatever, and feel like I'm deliberately choosing to do that and not just responding to my little thin box barking at me, So yeah, so it's kind of
That
how that
is,
goes.
I love that. So that is for anyone that's dealing with anxiety issues in particular, it's probably the most healthy thing you can do is to like look at your phone and put it on do not disturb
Yeah.
and or put it on personal mode if you have an iPhone where only like your friends and family, if they really
Yeah.
need you, they can get through. Otherwise, you'll see this stuff when you see it. There is
Yeah.
a lack of agency that we all have that is overlooked and not recognized by most people with how dependent we are to the dopamine kick of the next notification, the next alert, so on and so forth. In like workplace health, a lot of people I know, like personal friends and even myself in the past, felt kind of like held captive and hostage
Mm,
by my job because
right.
the expectation was I always was around to answer my email. I don't work at jobs like that anymore. And I think after COVID, people have kind of chilled
Yeah.
on that a little bit too, which
Yeah.
is nice. But you were talking about it, and I actually looked at my phone to make sure it was still on do not disturb while you were saying that, so I wouldn't get any pings. Right now, for me, I have my Google Calendar, text messages, and phone calls from like 50% of my contact list. All I get notifications for. Everything
Mm,
else is muted. Just app icons. So when I get on
there
my
you go.
phone, I know I'm like, all right, let's go look at
Yeah, the
that.
little badges pop up or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's really, really important.
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good small tidbit of hygiene advice for like your mentals. Protect
Yeah.
what's between your ears from the chaos that's out there. And a good way to do that is to keep the chaos at bay by setting
Yeah.
your boundaries. Um, Love that. For you, are there any other pieces of like your daily routine or anything that you have seen from people in the industry that might have higher levels of anxiety, depression, or so on and so forth? Like little tricks of the trade to make life easier, especially during like the really busy months, which for a lot of us are coming up. The next 2 or 3
Yeah.
months get to be chaos.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's so dependent on your other responsibilities, right? It's like I said, I'm a father of two. My wife and I are parenting these 2 kids, and we've got a cat, we've got a dog now, and so there's just a lot, obviously, that isn't work, that isn't fantasy, that is taking my time and demanding of my time, and hugely important. And so, all I think the only thing that I've ever really done in this arena that helped is just really be intentional about timing, and just
Mm.
be like, blocking out time. Like on my work calendar, I literally have time blocked off on days I know I have to go pick my kids up from school. And it's just in there is literally like, and it's explicit. It says, kids, I'm picking them up from school. And so, maybe I'll respond to an email or a Slack message, but I'm not getting on a meeting. I'm not getting on a call, whatever, that kind of thing. And people are respectful of that. And I'm lucky that Underdog is such a very crucially work-life balance oriented company. And like my boss, when he goes on vacation, he deletes Slack off his phone while he's on vacation.
That's
He
fair.
will get us, we will get him when he gets back, that kind of thing. And I think it's great. It's a great example for me that I then try to set for my folks as well on my team. And I think that, being intentional about time blocks in your day is kind of the only way to do that if you can. And not everyone's situation really allows for that. But, if you've got an hour or 2 hours, whether it's in the evening or the morning, whatever works for you, where it's like, hey, that's my article writing time or whatever. Like that's, my kids, so the last 2 years, I'm not doing it now, but the last 2 years I did a 2-start pitchers column. I called it the 2-start dive bar over at Razzball. And luckily for me, I had a piece of software I wrote up that kind of created the ranking for me based on some projections. And then I just had to write some notes about the players and, the upcoming week for them. And I would tell my kids like, hey, it's Sunday morning. I'm doing this for 1 hour. And so for that hour, like go get your cereal and hang out, and I'll be there in an hour. And they were good about that. And like you said, that's sort of lucky that I just am able to sort of set that with my family, and it works. But I think it's really blocking off time super intentionally. I think, again, we talked about empathy, and I think intentionality is the other thing that's like really, really important with this stuff. And just like the turning off notifications, not letting the things in your life dictate when they need to be done, but intentionally setting time and setting space and boundary for those things, and being really serious about how important stuff is for you. Because if you're looking at it and you're like, well, I don't have any time for fantasy sports content creation because of this and that requirement on my time right now, and I need downtime, well, then you need to make that choice and probably prioritize, you over the content, and maybe take a stab at it again in a year or something. It just depends on what your life situation is or why, you can't find that time right now. But just taking away any kind of like sleep or personal time in order to do that is just going to head you down the road of burning out. And so,
Yeah.
being as intentional as possible with your time, I think, is really the only trick.
Well, and it's a great parallel to, again, you talked about it a lot, but like being intentional about things, especially the valuing your time, making sure that you're keeping yourself healthy by not going crazy and having things organized and regimented. That's important for everyone. It makes
Yeah,
everyone happier. I don't care who you are. You'll be happy
yeah.
not doing that right now, and you start doing it. I struggle with it. I'm not going to pretend like I am a beacon of example
Right.
for that. But I think that the intentionality too, like it can go back to even more serious mental health things. And if I can just tie it back to the overall mental health topic, if you are someone who, like, I've sat in plenty of AA meetings with people. I went through a period of my life where I worried about being an alcoholic. Came to find out I wasn't. I just was self-medicating and had some bad habits. And I'm thankful for that. But I kept hearing in every meeting, like, words like, you have to be intentional, because for someone like me, I am a bad day or two away from going into a depressive slump. So I've got to be intentional about the barriers and boundaries I put in place that help me stay on course. And that can be, it's a great lesson that can be applied directly to non-mental health related work stuff that in the end, it has a mental health twist to it. But like you said, content creation, carve out time in the day where you're going to go write articles, and then you're not doing that for the rest of the day. That's the time. And also forgiving yourself if you don't get everything done in this super illicit window, saying it's okay.
Right.
have to have it done tomorrow. Let me go carve out some more time today, or I'll start this up again tomorrow. It's fine.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I really love all of that. It's really good advice. It's an interesting perspective to hear too. And you also, like, you were talking about family a little bit. So just a quick note: how has like your career in fantasy sports influenced or affected your family
Right.
and life?
Yeah, I think luckily really not a ton. I mean, look, my right now the majority sort of impact and influence that I have and that fantasy sports has on me and I have on it is my day job. So
Sure.
luckily that's just time my family knows dad has to work, like, or whatever. And
Right,
so,
right.
that's fine. But yeah, it's been cool. First of all, like, my kids are too young really to play fantasy sports yet. My son is 10. He could probably get into it, but he doesn't have a ton of interest yet. That's fine. My daughter's 6, so she's not into it yet. But my son still thinks it's cool. It's like I talked to him about, like, oh, I'm doing this. I wrote this and about this guy with the baseball, whatever. And he's hugely into soccer and hockey and a few other sports. And so, he thinks it's really neat. But they've basically just, I think because I've set really kind of intentional boundaries. I keep using that word, but like, like, hey, like these time blocks, like, yeah, it's Sunday morning, I'm doing this, and then we'll get together after or whatever. They've been pretty cool about it. And because I haven't let it just be something I need to do that takes up this amorphous chunk of time and doesn't seem to have an end to it, that's made it easier for the people around me, I think. And so, you probably have to ask them specifically if I'm right, but I feel like that's been a good, thing for them and made it easier for them to sort of like be like, okay, well, dad's got this hobby and it means he's doing this thing at this time. And that, it's been okay, it's never, obviously I've always prioritized them. Like, I'm not writing an article when my son has soccer practice. I'm there at soccer
Right,
practice,
right.
and like whatever. And so, there's things like that just, again, I have to make those choices and try to be, really sort of regimented and segmented about when my time is for them and when my time is for this, and be realistic about how much time I can dedicate to the fantasy stuff, because I can think to myself, oh, I'll take on enough things and I'll do this and this. I'll work for 4 different sites and I'll write this and it's not going to happen.
Right.
I'm a dad of 2 kids. Like, this ain't going to happen. So having, one baseball column and one football column, that worked great for me because I could do one thing a week, and find the specific time to do that. And I got to be honest, like, even that, as my kids get older, it got to be the point where I just told Razzball this year, I'm like, yeah, I can't come back this year. I'm not going to be able to do this. And maybe I'll pick it up again. To their credit, they were obviously super cool about it. They understood. And someone else has taken on that 2-start pitcher column and it's really good. So I'm glad for that. But, I just decided I'm doing this thing with Underdog and I'm doing some projection stuff. But other than that, I'm just going to be doing the dad stuff on weekends these days. And that's just, that was the right choice for me for now,
Well, I think family matters, man. I mean, that
Mhm.
it makes perfect sense. Time management and organization, you've talked about that a lot in the world of mental health. That is often one of the, like, if you miss your mark on that, it is going to open your mind up for the insidiousness of mental health issues if you're someone that
Mhm.
struggles with them. It's actually like number 1 on the list of me. I have a little checklist of things I try to hit the ball out of the park with on a daily basis. I don't
Mhm.
always, but sleep.
Right.
Personal hygiene, like shaving and
Mhm.
showering and brushing my teeth,
Yeah.
dieting correctly, and
That's a tough one.
organizing and being yes,
Yeah.
and organizing and being purposeful with my time.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
sleep, hygiene, exercise, diet, and being purposeful with my time and organized. If I do all 5 of those things, I guarantee, like, I it's evidence. I've seen it a million times over.
Right.
Those are like the best days of my life.
Yeah.
And
Well, and here's the thing,
days,
even more importantly, they're never the worst day of your life, right? Those days, even
right,
if things then go badly, it's still not a morass. It's not something that you're now trying to
right,
claw your way out of. It's just like, that didn't work out that well. Something bad happened, whatever. But because I got enough sleep and I ate reasonably and I, made time for things, it didn't destroy the day. It wasn't, it wasn't catastrophic,
right, right. Well, yeah, and like, sleep isn't like a hobby, but I have my own little system of things that I exercise and I would consider like mental health hobbies that I try to stay on top of. For you, besides fantasy sports, of course, do you engage in any hobbies or like creative outlets that help you maintain mental balance
Yeah.
and wellness?
Yeah, I do voiceover. So I call myself a semi-professional voiceover artist. So I do,
One
yeah,
man.
yeah, right, exactly. No, actually, so this is going to be kind of fun to tell the whole world, but yeah, I've been doing the voiceover narration for for a subset of videos for a company called True Naked Yoga. So if you and yes, it's actually naked people doing yoga instruction, 20 to 40-minute long videos. I've been narrating all the male instructors. And so I get a script and
Incredible.
have to look up a lot of Sanskrit words and make sure I pronounce, vinyasa correctly, and,
Sure.
Surya Namakase and whatnot. But yeah, that's a lot of fun. And then because I've been doing that voiceover stuff, I've voiced a few ads for Underdog just because I work there and they asked for somebody to do some stuff. And so if you're seeing an Underdog ad on TV these days, you're probably hearing my voice.
That is very cool.
Join the 1 million plus fans who have, da, 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 da. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, I love doing that. And honestly, it's mostly auditions because I don't get a lot of gigs through it. It's not something I can spend more than maybe, I mean, I haven't done it enough lately, but maybe 30 minutes a day when I get a chance, just to try to do a few. But it's fun and I enjoy it. And I like the challenge of, getting a prompt and getting a sense of what a potential client might want, and then trying to come up with a voice and an attitude and a persona to match that. I spent my high school years on stage and theater, and so that wasn't what I pursued for the majority of my life, but it's definitely a little scratch I can itch with, or itch I can scratch, however that goes, with this stuff. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's something I do for fun, sort of outside of fantasy sports. Yeah.
That is very cool. I think that's awesome. I'm not going to bring up AI stuff, but maybe we'll hop on here in a few months and talk about like a little bit of the AI thing in relation to not just that,
Yeah.
but everything else that's out there. There's a lot of trickiness that's going to come with the advent of technological rise over the next 2 to 3 years,
Mhm.
which ironically is part of why I'm hosting this on this channel instead of a different one. I think it's
Right.
good to have these mental health discussions kind of right there for people that are looking into AI stuff if they need it. Anyway, I can't let myself go into the AI side of things. This conversation will
Derail it.
shift completely there. What final things, and I want to go back and try and summarize this for everyone and not overload them with content. We're at 36 minutes, so we crushed it. We kind of got through everything we wanted to, and we're not at the 48-minute mark, which is rare so far in this series. Is there anything else advice-wise or just like a caring message that you would want to share with everyone in the fantasy industry that might be feeling alone right
Right.
now, or disgruntled, or not disgruntled, but you know what I mean, that
Yeah.
might be feeling down right now in the fantasy industry?
There is a thing. My wife and I, again, she's a psychologist. She knows a lot about this stuff professionally and personally, and so we talk about this a lot. And I see a coworker of mine is here. We love the show Schitt's Creek. I don't know if you're familiar. It's a sitcom, fantastic. Got a lot of buzz when it was on a few years back. And there's a moment in that show when the character Alexis is talking to her brother David, and he is freaking out about all kinds of stuff. And she just looks at him and goes, "David, nobody is thinking about you the way you're thinking about you." And he disagrees with her and kind of fights on it, but it's like and we say that to each other all the time, and it's real and it's true. Nobody is thinking about you the way you're thinking about you, and that should be a comfort, right? Because we are so critical of ourselves and our biggest critics and all this, and that's okay if it's well-intentioned criticism we're giving ourselves. But if we're thinking about what we're doing or what we're putting out there, how we're presenting ourselves, and only thinking about it, well, somebody is going to think this, the other people are going to think this, I'm going to get this kind of response or this kind of reaction. No, you're not. And even if you do it, it's probably not nearly as big as you think it is. Nobody's thinking about you the way you are. And that's a good thing. And I think that that's something that if you really focus on, when you're creating content, you're putting stuff out there, you're putting yourself out there, and you get some of that blowback or feedback that isn't great, or maybe not from the best place, from a good faith place, just know that trolls are going to troll, and people are going to say things to be aggressive and toxic,
Right.
and that's going to happen, but they don't actually think you're terrible. Like, they just don't think about you like that. It's so just, love yourself, do what you want to do, put out what you want to put out, and success or failure is immaterial. It's not the point. The point is, are you enjoying doing it?
Yes, that is a lost art in today's day and age. I had an episode a week or two ago, and we spent about 15 minutes talking about late stage capitalism.
Well,
in the world of late stage capitalism, being happy rather than being purposeful with work is not the way that society preaches. But I still think it is absolutely it's the ingredients to be a successful and happy person, and you just outlined it perfectly. I want to thank you for hopping on. I
Yeah.
also want to go back and just iterate one thing for the fantasy football content creators out there. I think some of the most pivotal advice that was given so far was criticism and feedback on results doesn't matter.
Right.
Criticism and feedback on your process does. So filter the
Yeah.
criticism through funnels, and you will be able to be a happy, successful, handsome, wonderful, super energetic, and beautiful person like Steve.
Oh, thank you, sir.
For sure. Well, Steve, I don't want to kick you off the show or anything. You want to talk about other stuff? Are you ready to roll out?
No, I mean, I'm good. Got to be honest. It's approaching 5 o'clock here on the West Coast, and I'm going to have to start cooking dinner. So yeah, this would be a good time to put up a little boundary and say, Ronnie, I'm done.
All right. I love it. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. For everyone else out there, make sure you follow Steve on X. It's literally his name, just one word. And we'll catch you. I'll be back tomorrow. I've got some pretty exciting guests coming in over the last 2 weeks to close this out. And thank you again for hopping on. For everyone else, this has been the Judgment Seesaw, and I'll see you tomorrow.
What's going on between my ears? Everyone seems to be so clear, but I'm feeling foggy. I barely can breathe. Let's talk about it with Ronnie and Steve. It's Mental Health Awareness Month.